I kind of like this one. I didn't know what it was going to be when I first started it, but I think it has some real weight to it that I didn't expect when I sort of threw together the concept. So my goal today is to just kind of punch up some of the unnerving aspects of the story and maybe make those moments hit a little harder. So this story is Candy Basement by Jay Wilburn. Tina Hux didn't like being babysat. She especially did not like having to leave her house. It wasn't a great house. It wasn't even as good as the house they lived in back when Tina's dad was still in the picture. She was 5 when they moved out in the night, and she was 7 now, but she had trouble remembering his face. Aunt Trixie's house was bigger. It was fine. Sorry, I can't read words. Tina could bring a bag of toys with her, but only one bag. She almost always forgot some toy that she didn't realize she wanted to play with until it was too late. It's got an unnerving title. Yeah, it is a little. It does have some dark connotations there right from the beginning, doesn't it? Uh, Trixie really was really Mom's aunt, but everyone called her Aunt Trixie. Her last name was Raspberry, so that was fun. It was almost like a witch's name, but Aunt Trixie would have been a good witch. Everything in the upstairs of Aunt Trixie's house was covered in a layer of yellowish brown. It felt slightly dirty, even though Aunt Trixie's house was mostly cleaner than Tina's. Mom worked a lot, and Tina only helped so much. If Tina had the words or the experience, she would recognize that sticky, waxy layer over all the walls and furniture was decades worth of accumulated nicotine. I like. I know I have a character in one of my zombie books. It's tiny, so every time I see that, I try to go in that direction, and so I've gotten used to starting with that vowel, but it definitely sounds weird when I say it that way. It's almost like I'm unfamiliar with the language I'm writing in. It was understandable that Tina wouldn't place that anyway because Aunt Trixie never smoked, not even sneaking one after dinner like Mom did sometimes. It was the long dead Mr. Raspberry who did all the smoking. Aunt Trixie had a little bit of a croupy cough to remember him by, though. The only perfectly clean furniture was a giant cabinet made out of white cloth that stood to the ceiling next to Aunt Trixie's giant box of a television. Alright, so that's one place I'll need to put something in. Each of the cloth shelves was packed with yarn. There were so many colors, and some were even striped. The thick yarn was for crocheting blankets and sweaters. The thinner yarn was for crocheting little animals and people. I got a little space there I don't need, so we'll tighten that up. Sometimes Tina got one of those yarn creatures to take home. They always seemed cute at Trixie's house, but looked more creepy in Tina's room. At night, she had to put the yarn creatures away. Trixie had some great stories when her mind was focused enough to remember to finish them. If Aunt Trixie's mind was less clear, she went on crocheting without answering Tina at all. Let me make that compound. On those days, lunch might come late or not at all. Tina was watching Trixie move her crochet hooks like magic wands, creating a blanket out of many colors out of thin air. She decided to test what kind of day this was. "What are you making, Aunt Trixie?" Obviously, it was a blanket. All right, let me put a comma there. Alright, obviously it was a blanket, probably the kind old ladies put around their shoulders. Tina was a kid, though, and old people usually let her get away with dumb questions. No answer. Mom had an early shift this Sunday, so Tina might be in for a long day with only crackers to eat. "My mom doesn't believe you have a basement," Tina said. "I told her you said she used to play in the basement, but she said this close to the beach, no one in South Carolina has a basement." Still no answer. This was going to be a very long day. Some of Trixie's stories were very strange, stranger than the basement. Mom didn't remember even. Mom didn't remember even being part of the house. Trixie said a few streets over, there was a garage that ate a boy. took him into another world and he was never seen again. She also said a giant man filled with rats attacked the prison back in the 70s or 80s. She also claimed she was friends with a werewolf and a were-gator who still lived in houses on the other side of the river. Tina started to think these were stories not meant for kids. The worried face she got from her mom when she tried to retell them kind of confirmed it, let me say. Tina started keeping Aunt Trixie's stories to herself. She sighed and started to stand. Trixie didn't look up from her work, but she said, "Your mother can't see the door to the basement anymore because she is grown and has grown-up concerns. She can't see it with her eyes or the eyes in the back of her mind that can see her memories and what's left of her imagination. No, she'll never see that door again." "How come you can still see it?" Tina asked. Because it's your house?" "No, Mr. Raspberry never saw it either. Probably he wouldn't have seen it even when he was a kid. He always had an old man's heart and saw the world with old man eyes." "So how do you see it?" Tina asked. All right, let me put an A on the end of her name. I'm already having enough trouble pronouncing it correctly. A phantom of a smile drifted over her lips and then was gone. She said, "I don't have so many grown-up concerns these days. I have old lady problems, and that's not the same thing. Also, my mind slips a little. I find myself lost in my old memories from when I was young. Grown folks as old as me sometimes get a little childlike or childish from time to time. We get to see the doors closed to other grown-ups again." Tina rubbed her hands together and asked, "So, my mom did play in the candy basement when she was a kid?" Trixie didn't answer. Tina waited, thinking it might only be a delay. Let me put a comma in there. Trixie leaned over and fed out a few more links of her thick yarn and returned to her silent work. Tina stood and took a few steps across the carpet to the single hallway through the rest of the house. "Where are you adventuring to?" Trixie asked to her back. Tina froze and said, "I'm going to go to the bathroom. If you're really going to play in the basement, be careful. Don't go too far because they won't let you through. They won't let me through to pull you back out." "Yes, ma'am." Tina shivered at the instruction. "And don't trust the candy cane man." "Yes, ma'am." Her voice was barely above a whisper now. As Tina moved through the hallway, she got one more instruction from Aunt Trixie. "Have fun." Tina approached the end of the hall with an unused guest room on one side and Aunt Trixie's bedroom on the other. She kept her eyes forward. At first, she still only saw the low bookshelf with dusty hardcovers and framed pictures in black and white. It was always that way at first. It wasn't even believing or like having faith the way they talked about in church. It wasn't about crossing your eyes to see through some sort of illusion. The bookcase was real. She could touch it. All right, let me put something here real quick. Left out word. The doorway was real, and once she saw it, she could touch that too. The knob came into view first, and then the frame of the door waxed over the reality of the bookcase and all the old things it held. Tina wrapped her little hands around the knob and had to wrestle its stubborn age to get it turned and then to pop the door toward her from its warped frame. The wood screamed a little as she got it open. The wet smell of the basement rose to greet her as the unfinished wooden steps led down into the darkness. Tina tried the light. Sometimes it came on, but today wasn't one of those times. The switch flipped stiff up and down with no response from the bare bulb at the bottom of the exposed stairs. She took hold of the loose railings and climbed down into the dark anyway. At the concrete floor covered in dirt, she had a little ray of dusty sunlight that spilled through a single window across a workbench cluttered with old oily tools and junk. I want to add something here. There was a single fat candle on a low stand. Tina always feared one day she would come down here and find it lit. If she saw that, she thought she might die of fright right where she stood. All right. I like that. So let's keep moving. Tina moved toward the light, even though she never trusted it. As she placed her hands on the edge of the workbench and stood on her toes, she could see out that window into the backyard that looked a little bit, but not quite like Aunt Trixie's yard. The differences were subtle but important. The weather wasn't exactly like it was from the windows upstairs. The clouds were always thicker down here. All right, let me fix a spelling real quick. The sunlight came filtered in a way that couldn't be explained by a dirty window alone. It was like the color from an old photograph. Trees weren't in the right places for the yard, and they didn't stay in the same places from visit to visit. The leaves and the bark didn't look right, not like any trees she saw through any other windows. Sometimes she would see a dog in the distant yard because the fence wasn't there through this window. It was long and angular. Let's say the animal. The animal was long and angular. It didn't look natural, and if she watched the dog too long, it would raise its strange snout, sniff the air, and turn its head toward her, as if it knew she was watching. No dog today. The clouds raced overhead in one direction, while the trees in this version of the yard swayed in the other. What bothered her most was the geometry of this window. Upstairs, the only floor Mom could ever visit, looked out on the backyard. This basement was a whole floor further down, and it looked out on its own version of the same yard that shouldn't be on this level. Sometimes she imagined this basement yard as being hidden under the grass of Aunt Trixie's backyard, upstairs yard. The problem was this yard had a sky and a sun and quiet neighbors' houses. All right, that needs to be plural. All right, quiet neighbors' houses still at not quite correct angles, and sometimes a dog that could sniff her out from the basement. She turned away from the window and wiped her hands on her pants. Okay, I'm going to add something to the next paragraph. Tina walked between the stacks of cardboard boxes that smelled like oil. She could hear the skitter of insects and mice inside them. She strolled into the darkness until it brushed her like a physical curtain. Her mind drifted to wonder who owned those oily tools, who placed these cardboard boxes. Adults couldn't even see the door. How could they store things in the basement? Who? For a moment. No. Let's have her say it out loud. She whispered to herself, the one who lights the candle. Her throat went hot and dry. I'll say turned. Her throat turned hot and dry in that thick darkness. Okay. Now we'll keep it moving along here. Then she stepped out onto the spongy grass in a world too cartoon bright to take in at first without squinting her eyes. Her other senses were assaulted as well. Overlapping music conflicted from all directions. Cartoonish laughs tittered and guffawed from everywhere. Smells of pastries, chocolate, and gummy candies mixed in a sickening swirl of sweetness. It was so thick in the air of this place that she could taste those mixing flavors just from the smells. Multicolored bears that she could almost see through arrived to greet her. She remembered all their names and bowed, accepting the small gummies they offered her. She took a bite. bit works okay, but people are going to think I misspelled it. She took a bite of each one because it was rude to refuse here. Sometimes those candy worms and little candy bears, the bigger bears, gave her. All right. Sometimes the ones they gave her felt like they squirmed as she bit into them. Tina tried not to think about that. Alright, she climbed onto the wafer boats, and the cookie guards joined her and the bears as they sailed and spun along the looping river of colored syrups. They offered to take her further and show her more than they had before, but Tina insisted. Okay, let me add another letter in here to make it spelled right. Insisted on getting off the wafer boat at the next graham cracker dock. Aunt Trixie, when her mind was clear, always warned not to go too far. They climbed up the purple castle made of crystal sugar and slid down the tubes of pixie stick slides over and over. Tina opened her mouth and tasted some of the sugar powder the first couple times, but after a while, that stuff started to taste like chemicals to her. She begged off another round on the slides as her stomach started to ache. They rode on candy elephants through the jelly bean jungles. A dark licorice tiger tried to jump on her elephant to get her, but one cookie guard and two bear friends sacrificed themselves to save her. The tiger mauled them below and dragged their pieces away into the trees. Everyone clapped. Tina did too, because it was rude not to. Those bears would be back to greet her on her next visit without fail. She wasn't sure about the cookie guard, though. They reached a fork in the road where bridges of peppermint crossed the Syrup River and led into the distant mountains in two directions. If she strained her eyes, she could see the odd pastel-colored candies that she only ever saw here or in Aunt Trixie's candy dishes. She thought of those odd treats as old people's candy, or candy from long ago. All right. I think that's all right. Let's keep going. They let her choose which way to go, so she said to go back the way they came. The entire safari was disappointed, but they didn't refuse her because they gave her the choice. As they returned to the spongy grasses, they gave her the choice, and refusing was rude. As they returned to the spongy grasses where she entered this land, all the candy people started whispering. Let me change that. Okay. We're in the home stretch here. Tina knew what this meant, so she looked to the sky. Riding on a pink sugary cloud, the candy cane man, striped red and white in spiraled colors, waved and smiled at everyone below. "Welcome to Candy," he said. "You must join me for a ball in your honor." "I need to go now," Tina said. Everyone gasped like they did all the times before. "You insult me in my own land, in front of my own people." Tina shook her head and stepped backward. The other candy creatures reached out for her with desperate hands and faces. She pulled away. "No." The creatures were shocked. They looked up at the candy cane man in terror. "I have never been so insulted by a guest as rude as you. I offer you everything this place has to offer, and you refuse. I am humiliated by your behavior. I'm sorry, I will go now." Let's have her use a contraction. She's 7 years old, after all. "I'm sorry, I'll go now." Tina turned and kept walking, even as the candy cane man ranted at her back about her rudeness. He didn't come every time she visited, but he did sometimes, and that was usually the end of her visits. It took her a long time to find the darkness beyond these overbright candy colors. When she did, Tina fumbled her way through the aisle of cardboard boxes. Every time she bumped one, something inside skittered about in surprised anger. She had to feel her way to the stairs because only the coolest nighttime moonlight spilled silver through the one basement window. She did not look out that window when it was night in the basement yard. Sometimes there was more than one moon out there. The shadows moved in different directions from the swaying trees, and she was almost always sure she could see faces pressed against those windows. It could have been a trick of the light and shadow. Kids saw things in the dark, and Tina knew that. The problem was that she also knew that some of the things kids could see that adults couldn't were just as real and could be touched. Those faces in the shadows outside the windows were just as real if you got close enough, whether you believed in them or not. Let's mention the candle again. Thankfully, and let's spell it right. Thankfully, that fat, forgotten candle wasn't lit. Tina tripped twice running up the dark stairs. The door to the top was closed even though she had left it open. She felt for the knob but couldn't find it. As she searched in mad fear, she thought she could hear the hard, striped feet of the candy cane man clicking along the dirty concrete below her. He was tall, and these steps had no backs to them. He could reach through and take her far away to punish her for her rudeness. Tina felt like she couldn't get enough breath to keep up with her racing heart. Let me break something and add another little moment of terror here. She heard the whispered hiss and flutter of a striking match. Someone was lighting the candle. Everything outside in the basement yard would see that light and know she was here. Alright, that's pretty scary, I guess. She finally found the knob a little higher than she expected. It groaned as the hardware held stubborn under her sweaty, sticky hands. Finally it gave, and she stumbled out into the upstairs hallway. She took a few running steps before the door to the basement slammed on its own behind her. "Don't let the doors slam like that," Trixie said. "Yes, ma'am." Tina ran the rest of the way into the living room. Trixie had left her crochet and had a plate with a sandwich, chips, and a pickle for her. Let's say for Tina. Aunt Trixie looked Tina up and down. "You're covered in goop, but it'll probably be gone by the time your mom gets here. She got off work early, and I lost track of time for fixing your lunch. You need to go ahead and eat." "My stomach hurts," Tina said in a small voice. Her heart had not yet completely slowed back to normal. "All that candy, right?" Tina shrugged. "I know, it's rude to refuse. All that in your stomach will be gone soon, too. Go ahead and eat some real food, and you'll feel better." Tina did feel better with the first bite. The savory flavors of real food took the woozy candy tastes out of her mouth and nose. I don't know if woozy's the right word, but I'm going to leave it in there anyway. Trixie sat with her and told Tina a new harrowing tale about the monsters and dark magic that lived in their town. It was another story Tina was not going to be able to tell her mom.